Every morning I put on armor that no one can see. I choose my words with surgical precision, measure my facial expressions in fractions, and calculate the exact number of seconds I can maintain eye contact before looking away. I've learned that existing incorrectly in my supervisor's presence is dangerous, a minefield where the explosive devices move daily and the map is always changing. For months I've been shrinking myself, becoming smaller, quieter, more apologetic, desperate to find the invisible lines I keep crossing without knowing. The first time my supervisor called me into his office, I thought it was about the marketing proposal I'd spent 3 weekends perfecting. I remember straightening my collar, smoothing my slacks, feeling a flutter of anticipation. Maybe this would be the beginning of being seen, of having my dedication recognized. Maybe this would be the moment when all those extra hours started to matter. Instead, he looked at me with that particular blend of disappointment and irritation that would become so familiar in the months ahead. My slides were unimpressive. My approach was derivative. My research lacked depth. When I asked for specific feedback, concrete ways to improve, he sighed as if my questions themselves were proof of incompetence. I spent that night remaking every slide, researching deeper, rebuilding the entire presentation. I sent it to him at 3 a.m., my eyes burning, my back aching from hunching over my laptop. But his response the next morning was a single line: "This still needs work." That was the first stone in what would become an avalanche of vague criticism. Each interaction slowly chipping away at the professional confidence I'd spent years building. Each dismissive comment making me question whether I belonged in this industry at all. Each day making me wonder if I was actually terrible at my job, or if there was something inherently wrong with me that made me unworthy of clear guidance. Work became a daily exercise in anticipatory anxiety. I'd rehearse conversations before they happened, preparing defenses for criticisms I couldn't predict. I started having tension headaches that bloomed at the base of my skull each morning as I badged into the building. I developed a persistent eye twitch that my doctor attributed to stress. I lost weight, then gained it back, then lost it again as my appetite became directly tied to whether my supervisor had found fault with me that day. The worst part wasn't the criticism itself, it was its shapelessness. "Just do better" became the refrain that haunted my dreams. Better how? Better at what? Better compared to whom? I couldn't address what I couldn't understand, couldn't fix what remained nameless. My colleagues noticed the change in me. The marketing director mentioned that I seemed quieter in meetings. The creative team lead asked if everything was okay at home. My desk neighbor commented that I hadn't brought homemade cookies to the office potluck like I used to. I brushed off their concerns with practiced smiles and vague explanations about being tired or busy or both. The truth felt too exposing to share. I was being systematically diminished by someone with power over my career, and I had no idea why. I couldn't articulate what was happening because the wounds were invisible, the attacks too nebulous to describe without sounding paranoid or oversensitive. In my previous jobs, I'd been known for my creativity, my enthusiasm, my willingness to stay late helping colleagues meet deadlines. I'd been the person who remembered birthdays and organized team lunches and kept a drawer full of emergency chocolate for bad days. Now I kept my head down, spoke only when spoken to, and left exactly at 5, desperate to escape the building where I felt perpetually wrong. 6 months into this slow professional death, I made one last attempt at clarity. I requested a formal performance review, hoping that the structure of an official evaluation might force my supervisor to provide concrete feedback. Perhaps with HR involved, with forms to fill out and metrics to consider, he would finally tell me exactly what I was doing wrong. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. I prepared extensively, bringing a portfolio of my completed projects, a list of my contributions to team initiatives, and documentation of positive client feedback. I practiced what I would say, how I would ask for specific examples of my shortcomings, how I would request actionable steps for improvement. When the day arrived, my supervisor was 20 minutes late. He hadn't reviewed any of my materials. The HR representative seemed uncomfortable, checking her watch repeatedly as my supervisor delivered the same vague criticisms in slightly more formal language. When I pressed for examples, he mentioned my attitude and unprofessional presentation. When I asked what specific behaviors constituted my bad attitude, he sighed, that familiar sigh, and told me that my defensiveness was proving his point. Afterward, in the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. Who was this hollow-eyed person looking back at me? Where had my confidence gone? My joy? My sense of professional purpose? I had become a ghost in my own career, haunting the hallways of a building where I once thought I might thrive. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every interaction I'd had with my supervisor since starting the job, searching for the moment when things went wrong. Had I offended him somehow? Threatened him? Was I genuinely incompetent in ways I couldn't see? Or was there something more insidious at play? Some bias or personal dislike that had nothing to do with my work at all? By morning, exhaustion had crystallized into something harder, something with edges. For the first time in months, I felt something other than anxiety and confusion. I felt anger, a slow burning, clarifying anger that finally allowed me to see the situation with unclouded eyes. It wasn't about my performance. It never had been. The shifting goalposts, the vague criticisms, the refusal to provide actionable feedback, these weren't the behaviors of someone invested in my professional growth. They were the tools of someone determined to keep me off balance, uncertain, perpetually scrambling to meet standards that didn't actually exist. The realization should have been devastating. Instead, it was strangely liberating. If this wasn't about my competence, if this was about power and control, then perhaps I wasn't broken after all. 2 days after the failed performance review, my supervisor stopped by my desk to deliver his latest critique. This time it was about my clothing. In an office where hoodies and sneakers were commonplace, where the CEO herself often wore jeans, he informed me that I needed to dress better. I was wearing what I always wore: neat, professional attire that aligned with our extremely casual workplace culture. When I asked for clarification, what specifically was inappropriate about my outfit? What should I wear instead? He told me to consult HR about the dress code. So I did. The HR representative confirmed what I already knew. My attire had never violated company policy. There was nothing wrong with how I dressed for work. In that moment, standing in the HR office with the printed dress code in my hand, something shifted inside me. It was as if a fog had lifted, revealing a landscape I hadn't been able to see clearly before. This wasn't about clothes or presentations or attitude. This was about power, the arbitrary exercise of it, the pleasure some people take in keeping others perpetually unbalanced and uncertain. For months, I'd been contorting myself, trying to become whatever undefined thing my supervisor wanted. I'd been treating his criticisms as valid feedback rather than what they actually were, a method of control, a way to keep me permanently on the defensive, eternally trying to prove my worth. That night, I opened my closet and stared at the suit I hadn't worn since my cousin's wedding 3 years ago. It was beautiful, charcoal gray wool, perfectly tailored to my frame. I'd bought it during a different chapter of my life, when I'd had disposable income and self-confidence in equal measure. I ran my fingers along the sleeve, feeling the quality of the fabric, remembering how powerful I'd felt wearing it. An idea began to form, not a plan for revenge, but a small act of rebellion. A way to reclaim some piece of my professional dignity, a method of making visible what had been happening in the shadows. The next morning, I arrived at the office dressed in the full suit, jacket, vest, crisp white shirt, polished shoes. In our ultra-casual workplace, I looked like I'd stepped out of a different universe, one where authority was conveyed through careful tailoring, rather than vague criticisms and shifting expectations. The reactions were immediate. Colleagues stopped at my desk, commenting on my dramatic change in attire, asking if I had an interview or a court date or a funeral to attend. To those who inquired, I offered only the same vague language that had been used against me for months. I needed to dress better. No further explanation, no clarification, just the echo of the unspecific directive I'd received. Word spread quickly through the office grapevine. By lunchtime, even people from other departments were finding reasons to walk past my desk, curious about the suddenly formal employee in the notoriously casual marketing division. When asked directly who had told me to dress better, I simply stated the truth. My supervisor had instructed me to elevate my professional appearance. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I wasn't trying to get in trouble. I was simply making visible what had been happening invisibly for months, the arbitrary exercise of authority, the moving targets, the impossible standards. I was bringing into the light what had thrived in darkness. By mid-afternoon, the company's CEO requested a meeting with me. I entered her office with my heart pounding, unsure whether I was about to be reprimanded or even fired. Instead, she asked me questions, direct, specific questions about my experiences, my interactions with my supervisor, the feedback I'd received or failed to receive. She listened without interrupting, taking notes, her expression growing increasingly troubled. At the end of our conversation, she informed me that effective immediately, I would be reporting directly to her while certain structural issues in the department were addressed. My supervisor would no longer have authority over my work or my professional development. Walking back to my desk, I felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, relief, lingering anger, and a deep exhaustion that seemed to reach my bones. The small act of resistance, of making visible what had been kept deliberately obscure, had created a seismic shift in my professional landscape. The weeks that followed were a gradual process of reclaiming pieces of myself that I hadn't realized were missing. Working directly with a CEO, I received clear objectives, specific feedback, and explicit recognition when my work exceeded expectations. The tension headaches began to fade. The eye twitch disappeared. I started bringing homemade cookies to team meetings again. I watched from a distance as my former supervisor adjusted to his diminished role. There were company-wide trainings on effective management practices and constructive feedback techniques. There were new reporting structures and accountability measures implemented throughout the organization. But the most profound changes were internal. With each passing day, I felt myself expanding back into the professional space I'd once occupied, offering ideas in meetings, collaborating enthusiastically with colleagues, taking creative risks without fear of undefined repercussions. I realized how much of myself I had compressed, how many aspects of my personality and talent I had hidden away, in an attempt to become unassailable. Of course, the scars remained. I still caught myself rehearsing defenses for criticisms that hadn't been made, still felt a flutter of anxiety when asked to step into someone's office, still sometimes questioned my own perceptions and memories of what had happened. Gaslighting leaves traces that take time to fade. And there were complicated feelings about my former supervisor. Not forgiveness. I hadn't reached that point yet, wasn't sure I ever would. But a kind of troubled understanding. What insecurities drove someone to systematically undermine another person's confidence? What had happened in his life to make the exercise of arbitrary power so appealing? These weren't questions I could answer, nor was it my responsibility to try. My focus instead was on rebuilding, not just my professional confidence, but also my trust in my own perceptions. For months, I had questioned whether I was truly experiencing what I thought I was experiencing, whether my interpretations were accurate or distorted by oversensitivity or paranoia. I had allowed someone else's reality to supersede my own, had doubted the evidence of my senses and experiences. Never again. That was the promise I made to myself as I settled into my new role, my new reporting structure, my new understanding of workplace dynamics and power. Never again would I allow someone to make me question my own competence without evidence. Never again would I accept vague criticisms as valid assessments of my worth. Never again would I shrink myself to accommodate someone else's insecurities. A year has passed since the day I wore a suit as an act of quiet rebellion. In that time, the company has implemented formal mentoring programs, clear performance metrics, and regular feedback sessions designed to ensure that all employees receive specific, actionable guidance for professional growth. My former supervisor has moved on to another organization. I've been promoted twice. But the most significant transformation can't be measured in organizational changes or career advancement. It's in the way I carry myself through the world now, not just at work, but in all aspects of my life. It's in my newfound ability to distinguish between valid criticism and manipulative control tactics. It's in my refusal to accept vagueness where specificity is required, in my insistence on clarity and respect in professional interactions. I think often about that version of myself from a year ago. The person who spent each night remaking presentations that would never be good enough, who developed physical symptoms from the stress of perpetual inadequacy, who lost faith in their own perceptions and abilities. I wish I could reach back through time and tell that person what I know now, that gaslighting can happen in professional contexts as well as personal ones, that power can be wielded invisibly to devastating effect, that sometimes the problem isn't your performance, but someone else's pathology. Most of all, I wish I could tell that earlier version of myself that the fog would eventually lift, that clarity would come, that there would be a day when the anxiety didn't feel like a living thing inside my chest, when meetings didn't trigger fight or flight responses, when work would become a source of satisfaction rather than dread. The suit hangs in my closet now, a reminder of both a low point and a turning point. Sometimes I take it out and run my fingers along the sleeve, remembering the day I decided to make visible what had been kept deliberately obscure. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It wasn't a righteous speech or a formal complaint. It was simply a refusal to keep playing a game with rules that changed every day. I've learned that resistance doesn't always look like revolution. Sometimes it's just the quiet insistence on reality, on making concrete what others work to keep abstract, on bringing into the light what thrives in darkness, on refusing to participate in your own diminishment. My supervisor never apologized. I never expected him to. People who use vagueness as a weapon, who move goalposts as a matter of course, who derive power from keeping others off balance. These people rarely possess the self-awareness required for meaningful remorse. And that's okay. My healing wasn't dependent on his recognition of the harm he caused. Instead, I found my way back to myself through small daily reclamations, through speaking up in meetings again, through trusting my professional instincts again, through remembering that criticism without specificity isn't feedback, it's control. Now when I put on my work clothes each morning, the casual, comfortable attire that aligns with our company culture, I no longer feel like I'm donning armor. I no longer rehearse defenses for unnamed failures or brace for vague criticisms. I no longer make myself smaller in hopes of becoming less of a target. Instead, I take up the space I've earned through competence and hard work. I offer ideas without prefacing them with apologies. I ask questions without fear of revealing ignorance. I exist professionally without constant anxiety about existing incorrectly. The invisible lines I once desperately tried to identify and avoid have disappeared. Or perhaps they were never there at all. Just the fabricated boundaries of someone else's insecurity, projected outward and mistaken for reality. Either way, I'm no longer tripping over them. I'm no longer contorting myself to fit within their ever-shifting confines. I'm simply doing my job, receiving clear feedback, making improvements where needed, and taking satisfaction in work well done. It sounds so simple written out like that. So normal. So much like what a professional environment should be. And perhaps that's the most profound realization of all, that what I once viewed as an extraordinary act of rebellion was simply a return to ordinary standards of human dignity and respect. I don't wear suits to work anymore. I don't need to. The rebellion served its purpose, bringing into the light what had thrived in darkness. Now I simply show up as myself, competent, imperfect, continuously improving, worthy of specific feedback, rather than vague criticism. That's not a dramatic ending to this story. There's no triumphant confrontation, no public humiliation of the person who caused so much private pain. Just the quiet victory of reclaiming my professional confidence, my trust in my own perceptions, my right to exist in the workplace without perpetual anxiety about invisible lines. And for now, that's enough. That's everything.